In order to build trust in a remote or hybrid environment, it takes a new level of intentionality that may be slightly out or extremely out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And without that intentionality, it won't work. Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. I'm your host, Dustin, here with Blake as well. And today we're going to talk about how to build trust in a remote or hybrid work environment. It is November. We've made it here. We are coming up on halfway through the last quarter of the year. So stress is either really high or really low. But hopefully we can eliminate some of that or ease some of that today to help you build some trust amongst your team if you are remote or hybrid. Before we get into that, I want to remind you at the Culture Base, we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get them there. If you're listening on an audio podcast platform, we would appreciate whatever kind of 5-star rating or review that your platform allows for. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. We're glad that you're here. We'd love for you to hit the thumbs up button. That's a like. That's what they call it. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you're notified every time we release new content, which is every single Tuesday for these episodes, but we're dropping shorts and reels and stuff like that as well. Speaking of shorts and reels, you can follow us on the social medias. That's for Jake. At the Culture Base, BASE. You gotta listen to the last episode to really understand that, which you probably should just go back and listen to the last episode. But anyway, you can follow us at the Culture Base, at the Culture Base, BASE. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the normal places that you would follow people at. You can follow us along there, and we'll post some of the content there as well. A couple more things before we get into it. You can go to theculturebase.com/strategy for a free 30-minute strategy session with us on how we can help you know what you're about, show where you're going, and develop a scalable team to get you there. And while you're there, go ahead and head on over to the resources tab. Pick up our free ebook, The Scalability Playbook, Proven Methods for Building High-Performance Teams. It is a free book. Love free books, and 5-star ratings are already rolling in, as you can see here from our good friend Omer, who I believe we're going to talk about in our podcast today. But that's all the business. Let's get into today's episode. What do you say, Blake?
Yeah, so let's get into it. Let's start with the problem. And in order to start with the problem, the bigger why is important. In order to have good culture, there is one key component, a part of any good culture, and that is safety. Safety is so crucial to any good culture. And in order to have safety, you have to have trust. Okay, so this has to be there. As much as people maybe they feel like trust is kind of like, well, yeah, but that's also a touchy-feely kind of thing. And really, people just need to come and do their work and then go home, right? They just need to clock in, clock out, move the widget. We're good. Okay, you're right. That is what Milton Friedman would say a good business looks like. But a scalable business doesn't. And one that's long-term and has good people in it and everyone's life is being bettered requires trust. Okay. So if trust is what we're after, our problem comes to how do we build trust in this virtual, online, remote kind of world? And the problem is one of the easy parts of trust when you're side by side with someone is that you can have moments of trust a little easier. You can have moments where someone's going through something and you can look over and you can say, hey, what's up? You okay? And you can have a quick moment. You have these small little things, and trust builds over time. Okay. I had a business coach who always used to say, you build trust in pennies and you spend it in dimes. Okay. So if you're building that trust, it's little moments like this where we're talking, we're having these reactions. In a remote world, you're lacking some of that shoulder to shoulder or face to face interaction. And so it makes it a little bit harder. Communication in that time, if we're shoulder to shoulder and I see something's going on, I can deal with that or ask about that or build that a little quicker by saying, hey, what's up? There's communication happening there. In remote world, we got communication gaps, right? Our communication that we are having is all focused on one side of it. And what side is that? Business. Trust in business is not built just with business talk. Okay. It's built with other things going on. EOS, Traction, they in your L10 meetings, which are level 10 meetings. Sorry, I'll try not to throw in acronyms everywhere. These meetings always start off with personal and professional good news. It seems cheesy, it seems stupid, but the point is we're trying to build trust, right? So when you have communication gaps and you can't do that naturally for someone in a remote situation, it's a problem. We also have a perceived isolation or a lack of transparency that can happen because there is a safety. I think this is important to say because I'm not bashing remote work. There actually is some safety and culture with having a computer in between me and the other person. Dustin and I were part of a church a while back, and the idea of handing people coffee every morning, people love their coffee because it was something that they could hold that kind of protected you at some level. There was a barrier. And I know that sounds like not trust. That's not the case. It's just how you build trust, right? It allows a barrier that I can be a little vulnerable and have something in between us. Well, there is a benefit in the remote world, but the perceived isolation is the cost sometimes. It's that, yeah, I'm having a meeting right now for 1 out of 8 hours, or maybe 1 out of 40 hours in a week. That is a little bit challenging, and that perceived isolation can cause some more problems. And then the other part that I think is one of the hardest gaps to overcome, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit deeper, is the challenges in accountability and in reliability. What are the expectations? Are they clear enough? And we'll get into that more.
Yeah. And are they, it's hard to gauge that productivity when you're not, it's like the whole George Costanza thing. You can walk by his office, and if he looks frustrated, then he must be really busy and getting a lot done. Like, he's like, oh, all I got to do is just look frustrated, and people think I'm really working hard.
Yeah.
And so if you're watching on YouTube, it's like, it's like, man, you really look like you're working hard. Yeah. So you kind of miss out on that, but there's some ways around that too that we're going to talk about here. But let's get into the solution. I would say a few different things that we would offer up as a solution to this problem, right? Of this, and we're focusing not just on here's how to effectively run a hybrid work solution. We're focusing in on the trust part because that's the part that's going to affect the culture the most, and that's what we're here. The culture base, right? All right. So first part of the solution is to foster some transparent communication. And there are a lot of ways that you can do that. You can do regular calls. You can do instant messaging. There's different like Slack and Google Chat type tools. There's obviously Zoom and things like that. But leaders need to be probably even more transparent about their decision-making process because they don't have as much of that around you physically nonverbal communication, right? And so it's kind of that rule in the theater, right? So if you're on Broadway or you're in a theater play, they tell you to over exaggerate your facial expressions because people all the way in the back of the room, if your facial expressions are minor, they're not going to catch it. They're not going to catch the concern on your face. They're not going to catch the worry or the doubt or the fear or the joy on your face. But if you can over exaggerate it, they can catch it. It's really no different here, right? Imagine if you're leading this remote team that you're on stage and there's some people that are all the way in the balcony, right? You kind of need to over exaggerate some of this communication, some of these decision-making process, including company goals, team expectations, making people feel valued and informed. Next solution for us is to set clear expectations and accountability. Now, I know this sounds like a broken record because I feel like every single week when we get into the solution, we talk about be clear expectations, set clear expectations, set clear expectations. And I know we say it all the time, but nothing will ruin a culture more than lack of clear expectations. Mm-hmm. It's a killer. It's a killer, Blake. So set clear expectations, define clear roles and responsibilities. If someone says, that they're not 100% sure what their job is, or if they can't repeat back to you what you think their job is, then guess what? It's unclear. So there's metrics that you can use for tracking. Obviously, there's KPIs to use some TLAs up in here. You can, sorry, if you're new to the podcast, TLA, 3-letter acronym. Blake loves them, and I love to give him a hard time about it. Leaders love them, though. That's why Blake's good. That's why he's a good leader, because he loves good TLA. But there are ways that you can measure your goals and track regular process. And in some sense, I would say that there's a bit of an advantage to this remote or hybrid environment here, because if you're kind of in a screen environment all day and people walk by your desk and there's multiple monitors, you can track real-time metrics and the goals, right? We were on a call yesterday, Blake, with a culture-based client, and we were walking them through some CRM stuff, and we were showing them like, hey, you can know exactly where you're at on every step of the way. For anybody in the organization can click on this page right here and see exactly where you're at and these trackings and these KPIs that we're trying to hit, right? And so setting those clear expectations and accountability, some ways I would argue maybe a little bit easier in a remote or hybrid work environment, but either way, just making sure that they exist and that they're regularly kept up is super important. What other solutions do you have for us, Blake?
Yeah, just building those personal connections. They take intentionality in a personal, like you got everyone in a same room. It like you're almost forced into intentionality. If you're going online and you're like, and mental health's really important. Part of mental health is connection. And so having good support system, having good connection system. So I'm going to encourage you to get outside of your comfort zone on a lot of this and engage. Okay. It may be like, oh, but I got so much work to do. That's okay. We all do. Right. But you got to build those personal connections. It's so funny to hear people talk about their work bestie or their work wife or their, like why we're putting the word work in front of it, because it's just separating the connection that we have. But those people have great relationships in those settings. And that is an area that we've got to be more intentional in a remote world. We got to be more intentional to foster that. Okay. So we got to push that. And this is like the flexibility is so good, because the other part of feeling significance is an aspect of, what's the word? Autonomy is having an aspect of autonomy that I can put in, and what I put in, I get to have a little bit more say in how that it's done. And the results really do come from what I do. And that's great. That flexibility is great. But being able, I do feel like when we are in a remote world like this, that one of the areas that, and I struggle in this too. Okay. So like sitting in the room telling you that I have a problem here. I love empathy. Remote empathy is harder for some reason. It is harder to just be like, because remote almost has this idea of productivity and efficiency and boom, boom, let's say what we need to, let's do it. And back to Dustin's point, our communication becomes poor. And a lot of times when our communication becomes poor, especially if there isn't a video aspect to it, because I can explain what I meant by that text message that I was just doing quickly and you thought I was being a big D-hole. Like, I don't want to be that guy. So I'm glad you would hold me accountable to that. But sometimes those texts, when we're just using chats or Slacks or some kind of Teams thing, we're just saying things really quick. And then really quick communication's never really quick. Don't know if you've ever seen that, because then you got 40 other parts of the thread that are now a discussion about HR's getting involved. And they're like, hey, when you said this, and you're like, I just was saying it quick. That's all it was. That's just, yep. But that's the thing, is empathy does take a little bit more time and effort. And when you're side by side, that empathy is easier because you can feel someone's energy. Okay. And I'm not trying to be too woo-woo here, but you can feel someone's energy when you're right next to them. That's harder with the screen. So you have to work harder.
Yeah. I think to sum up what Blake's saying here is that
he's good at that.
in order to build trust in a remote or hybrid environment, it takes a new level of intentionality that may be slightly out or extremely out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And without that intentionality, it won't work. Think about anything that you've had in your life that you've been really successful at. Was it likely that it happened just by happenstance, or was there some intentionality behind it? So if you want to build trust in this remote or hybrid work environment, you're going to have to put a ton of intentionality behind it. I want to say too, and this probably is a little bit more of an action step because it's a little bit more practical. Anything else you want to get into, Blake, here on the solution? Let's get into action steps real quick. And this is, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and give one for the kind of the overall organization. There are some I've been remote working now for maybe almost 2 years, year and a half or so. But even then, I was part of an organization that was hybrid for 3 years. The church that Blake and I were talking about, we didn't have offices. And so for 3 years, we were hybrid. We would come in for meetings, but for the most part, we were all hybrid and working in that way. There are now a ton of options out there for remote workspace to try to recreate, if you will, some of the positive sides of being in a physical space or physical work environment. And so there's websites like Flow Club, FocusMate, Yardi Cube, which is, it's a weird spelling. It's YARDI and then cube with a K. I don't know what people are doing out here with their business names, but it exists. So they are really cool. I've dabbled in them. I know some friends that use them quite a bit, especially when it comes to deep focus work and accountability. And some people will do them within their organization. Some people will hop on there and be a part of other people that are doing similar work that they're doing, but they're not necessarily a part of their organization. So that's just a little kind of a 2024 hack of what you can do to try to create some of this, recreate, I should say, some of this environment that you would normally have in a physical space, but you may not be able to. Mm-hmm. I'll just say that too. Like some organizations don't have a choice. Like this is how it is. They're remote, they're hybrid, whatever it is. And so being able to make the best of that, I think, is super important. You want to get into some leadership action steps, Blake?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even know all those different softwares that Dustin was just talking about, but I think the thing that's important for an organization to understand is the software is a tool. The intentionality is a human aspect. And it is a part where you've got to say, so for leadership, you got to have that intentional, transparent communication. And as a leader, you need to be the one bringing it to your team. Last week, we talked about soft skills, right? We talked about how important it was to help in the development of and mentorship side. Leaders are the ones who start that. Don't ask those that are following you to be the leader. You've got to be the leader. Okay. So by setting up, and intentionality looks like this. We're going to have bi-weekly, we're going to have weekly, we're going to have virtual meetings where we get together and we're seeing each other's face. Now, those could be about work. They could be not about work. But the intentionality is the consistency side. I think with virtual, the word consistent needs to be right there with it. Okay. So whatever it is that you do, bring consistency to it. So the transparent communication is important. Modeling accountability. Okay. So since when it comes to accountability, it's a lot harder to ask for face-to-face clarification on questions. And especially when we have a meeting and then we ask a really bad question, by the way, at the end of meetings. Everyone get it? All right.
Everyone good?
Guy to be like, not me. I don't get it. They're not.
Right. You're like, Bill, we're almost done with this meeting.
Damn it, Justin. Like we're having those moments.
Jerry.
Being like, okay, who needs clarification on our expectation? That's a better question. Who needs clarification? That's way less a value who is smart, who is stupid. And the other one is who just needs more information to do their job well. Hey, what clarification do you, and I honestly, when we're doing a meeting, I don't do that as a widespread thing. I try to do it in the moment, right? So if I'm talking to Justin and I'm like, hey, Justin, we got to be doing these things. Cool. What clarification do you need to do this better? Do you feel 100% understood on this, or is there still some gray area? Okay, well, great. Now, hopefully right after that meeting, when you say, does everybody get it? And nobody's going to, say they don't. and you get off the meeting and all of a sudden you get 4 pings. Hey, just to make sure, when you said
to clarify what we just talked about for an hour and a half there.
Yeah. You don't even have the follow-up email, which, by the way, is another good thing to have. It's a follow-up of what was talked about right there. Dustin is just badass at doing that, by the way. But having some follow-up information that hits us, and we're like, oh, yeah, we did talk about that. And a place to come back to 2 days later and go, oh, I do need to double check on that. So having that's great. But you want to be able to offer that face-to-face thing as well. So that's where some of those check-ins, I would encourage leaders to have more check-ins with your team that you are pushing, not, hey, if you need anything, come to me and I'll help you out. Now it's hey, I'll come to you to make sure you need clarification. And we're going to just talk about you. I'm not talking about Tina and Flo over here. It's just you right now, Justin. We're talking about this. And so you're giving them support that they need, right? But you're offering that now. So that those regular check-ins are, I don't know that people can do really good remote work without it and build a good aspect of trust if you're not checking in.
I'm just going to go ahead and say it because we're all thinking it. Justin sounds an awful lot like Dustin. It's just one letter off.
I don't know that everyone else is thinking that.
I've been feeling personally attacked for like 3 minutes.
Oh, I separated Dustin. I said Dustin's killer at those follow-ups.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Now, if you say Balake, now I've got a problem.
Yeah. How do you pronounce it? All right. So let's real quick get into some action steps for team members. There's 2 really important ones here to build trust. Number 1, communicate proactively. Don't sit there with your arms folded at your desk and be like, well, if they cared, they would follow up with me. No time for that. Don't do that. I'm an Enneagram 4. I love my feelings as much as the next guy. But listen, be proactive with your communication. Don't just sit there and go, well, if they really cared, they would reach out to me. Like, I get it. I know where you're coming from. There's no time for that. Just go ahead and be the communication that you wish you had.
That's right.
Just go ahead and be that. All right. Secondly, show reliability and consistency. Right. So again, this comes down to communication. But if you can consistently hit the things that you said you were going to hit, I was talking with one of my mentors yesterday, and he reminded me that like in business, it's always good to under promise and over deliver. I would say this is very true too of this remote hybrid situation to build trust. If you can just say, look, I know you asked for this by next week, but I had a moment. I went ahead and knocked it out. Boom. That shows that you're proactive and that you see gaps and you're filling gaps and you're making the most of your time. And that builds trust with your leader. They don't think you're at home binging Netflix all day. They think, okay, you're actually getting this done. So here, let's give you some more responsibility and build that up. So overall teams, you can implement project management tools. You can start virtual team building activities. You can create clear communication guidelines, which we've nailed so many times during this episode. But those are some action steps that you can begin to take. Any final thoughts on this, Blake, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think when you talked about even just right there, communication guidelines, if you're doing remote work, standardize how you communicate. Okay, you got to standardize it, and then brand it. I'm using all of Dustin's like key things here. Standardize it, brand it, send everyone a thing they can print off and put at their home desk or remote station that's a remote background. Here's how we communicate. Okay. You got to give them that. So
yes, I know some organizations will even say, hey, when we hop on Zoom, I need you to have at least a blurred background, if not a virtual background.
Yep.
Some organizations are like that. But camera on is a good thing. Yeah. Stay on mute until you need to speak. That's like all of these things exist for a reason. But if you don't communicate that, then you just hop on these Zoom meetings and it's a jungle out there. It is weird and wild. It can get really crazy really quickly. So having those things, I think, are a good ways to build trust. So, all right. So next time we always talk about developing scalable teams. Next time we're going to talk about developing a scalable onboarding process for new hires. Let's get busy with some onboarding. It's going to be awesome. Episode 68. We'll talk to you next time on the Culture Base podcast.